Heather Antos, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you guys?
Excellent. Always glad to see you.
Yeah, it was funny watching that ad that just rolled through, getting to see the various hair colors I've had and the different times I've appeared on this show.
Right.
I've been on here a few times now.
You're like a regular.
Right. If nothing else, this show exists to be like a high school yearbook where you can just flip through all the different versions. Yeah, this is your new era's situation. Is this podcast?
I love it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, we're glad to have you here. Because we're such good friends, we're fans of you. You've been on with us a bunch of different times, but we may have some folks tuning in tonight who don't know Heather. Give us a quick rundown of who you are, what you do, all that fun stuff.
I mean, you did a pretty good job. I make comics. If you read comics, I've probably worked on some of them that you read. This year marks my 10th year in comics professionally, actually. And yeah, I got my start launching the Star Wars #1 and everything at Marvel 10 years ago. And since then, I've gone on to work for various Image titles, Valiant. I'm currently with IDW, where I work for that other Star franchise. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've worked on just under 700 comics in my career.
Holy cow!
See,
that's the problem. That's why I don't read as many comics, because there's too damn many. You've got 700 yourself.
That's right.
I don't sleep a lot though, so like it's
fair enough.
Yeah,
it's kind of a trade-off situation.
That's funny. Yeah, we mentioned at the top that you worked on Chrysanthemum and Doctor Aphra and a bunch of others. Was it Ryan Johnson? Who is it who said they loved the way you interpreted the beeps for the droids? That was that was a while ago. But anyway. Yeah, we'll call it Ryan Johnson because why not?
Say Ryan Johnson, yeah.
Who's going to check? But who's your favorite Star Wars character that you've? I love that Jabba mug. That's amazing.
Not for you guys.
Yes.
Which character that you've been a part of, and let's call it an original character that that didn't exist before. That which character do you take the most pride in and you're most excited about?
I mean, anyone who knows me or has spent 2 seconds on my Twitter probably knows, in the Star Wars universe, it's definitely Doctor Aphra. Very proud of being a part of her inception into comics, into the Star Wars universe. Full credit to Kieran, Jason, and Salva for really, she's hers, or they're hers. But like she's just not supposed to be as big as she is, and she blew up overnight. And like when we talked about her and like Darth Vader is kind of this lonely silent type, like that's a boring comic to do.
Right.
We need someone who's annoying and talkative and can do all his dirty work, so let's bring in this Star Wars version of Indiana Jones. No one thought she would be as successful or as popular as she has been. And like, it's insane. It's insane that like 10 years later, people are still, almost 10 years later, people are still talking about her. She showed up in board games. She has her own book. She's in an audio book. She's, in the mobile games, she's popping up everywhere. It's incredible.
How does it feel when you're sitting at a table at a con and somebody walks up dressed as Aphra? Like, what is that? How does that make you feel?
It's the coolest thing, honestly. Like it is to see, someone connect to a character you've had even just a fraction of a part, bringing to life, connect with them so much that they want to, cosplay as them or, role play as them or whatever, do 501st work. It's surreal. It's the most rewarding thing, creating stories and comics and any sort of creative endeavor is a bit of a narcissistic pursuit. We're all just putting ourselves out there for people to validate us, right? And tell us we're good and what we're doing is awesome. But we do it because, it's our way of trying to connect with the world around us and to show that our work has impacted someone so much that they want to emulate that in some way, shape, or form. It's just like, that's it. We've done it, you know? So cool.
Well, speaking of characters, and this may be the shooting fish in the barrel question. Obviously, with Book of Boba Fett, we get Chrysanthemum in live action.
Mm-hmm.
Begs the question of the other characters you worked on: is Aphra the one that you want to see in live action, or is that such a precious, like sometimes we have our hero built up in our mind. We have that person like, well, I don't want to see what they look like because I don't want it to ruin, what I've created. Is she the one? Who else do you want to see in live action that you've worked on?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're working on an IP that's as big as, anything owned by Disney is, Star Wars, especially Marvel, you do understand that you don't own these characters, and that at a certain extent you have to give them up, right? You have to let them fly on their own, and they don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the world, and they belong to the corporation they're in. Like, I hope she makes it to live action and animation, or better yet, a video game. I think she was made to be a video, the star of a video game. But she could absolutely hold her own Disney Plus show. I like to remove myself from pontificating on these things as much as possible, just solely because I think the best expectation is no expectation, because then you can't be let down or disappointed. I don't like to fan cast. Like, I see people and I'll entertain the conversations, but I personally don't want to, because if I start to envision, I want it done this way by this writer, this director, this actor, like, I'm just going to be disappointed when it doesn't happen. And I'm just, I just want to be excited and enjoy it when it does happen. Like Chrysanthemum, as you guys mentioned, I had no idea he was going to show up in Book of Boba Fett. I found out at the same time that everyone else did. And like, I teared up when my guy walked on screen, because I never thought I'd get to see a character that I had a part of bringing to life, like on a Star Wars television show. It was, and I couldn't mentally process it at the time. Although I think I was more excited when he ended up in Fortnite than I was when he was in Book of Boba Fett.
Right. That's kind of like, okay, he's ubiquitous enough that we can put it and the kids will want to play with it. And
I get to be Chrysanthemum.
I know, exactly.
I play Fortnite every day. I get to be Chrysanthemum.
You've probably been shot by my son somewhere along the line.
Or maybe I shot your son.
Yeah, that's I don't know.
Play.
All right, we're gonna create a live death match with Heather and my 11-year-old son and see what happens. So you're one of a handful of people who's actually written for both or been involved creatively for Star Wars and Star Trek. Which, it's funny. I think when we were kids, when Nick and I were younger, like there was like this weird sort of Star Wars, Star Trek war, which didn't really exist. Or maybe it did. But so where are the similarities as you're working on a Star Wars or a Star Trek comic, and what are some of the biggest differences, obviously, other than them being two different IPs?
Yeah, they're two vastly different IPs. I mean, I think the fact that we're following a group of characters in a fictional universe that happens to take place in space is about as similar as they get. Like, that's, but Star Wars is very much space fantasy, very classic Joseph Campbell hero's journey type, good versus evil, right? Like, really, at the end of the day, a lot of Star Wars stories come down to good versus evil, light versus dark, wrong versus right. And Star Trek is a lot more esoteric. It's a lot more introspective. It's a lot more existential about, the potential of humanity and mankind, which is true science fiction, and so I definitely, I mean, I not to date myself, but I wasn't around in the 80s when those debates were happening. They're just both franchises that take place in space. Like, that's kind of it. The science tends to be more real in Star Trek. They have an actual astrophysicist physicist that checks everything.
Oh, really?
In house. Yeah. Even the comics, to have everything as space accurate as we possibly can have it.
I think that's exactly what and that's sort of where I used to have the conversation with people when they would say, or the funnier thing was people would be like, "Oh, you like Star Wars? Yeah, my son, he's got an Enterprise at home and he's got Vulcan ears or whatever." And I'm like, okay, different, but fine. But you know, science fiction is actually such a different genre, which is why I think, like, honestly, when I look back at some of the old EU novels, for example, in Star Wars, I wasn't a big fan because they were great sci-fi novels, but my brain wasn't like, I wasn't in a sci-fi mindset, and it felt kind of a weird place for Star Wars.
And I think that's where, in some of I won't do any specific call outs, but some more recent interpretations, as we start to spin out from just solely the films, and even some of the recent films, that they do touch on a hint of more sci-fi than just fantasy. And it's when they brush up against the sci-fi elements that I'm just like, this doesn't feel, not that it doesn't feel right, but it's just not. It's just like we're kind of skirting the outskirts, the outer rim, if you will, of what Star Wars is. But there was a time, I think I'm the only comics editor who's ever worked on Star Trek and Star Wars at the same time. And there was a really brief overlap where, like, it was like 3 months or so where I was on both. And to be in the calls, I had to like really mentally make sure I was present to not say warp versus hyperdrive versus phaser versus blaster versus, all of these like interchangeable, but every franchise has their language, and God forbid you say the wrong one in the wrong meaning with the wrong exec. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because you hit on a little bit, and Pete, you hit on a little bit too, even talking about like the old EU, we've got books, that kind of stuff. We're at a point now where we have comics, we have books, we have TV shows, which we never had in Star Wars. We've got movies coming back. We have video games. We know the story group exists. Like, we know there's this group that's kind of helping, find a path, keep things, on the rails, but how does that work in your experience? Like, what are the challenges in certainly an IP this big, but covers this many mediums, finding a way for it to still, all jive and relate and work together?
Yeah. And working with Star Wars, as long as I've had, the story group has definitely like changed and evolved and molded in various different ways as the years have gone on. I think just as Star Wars continues to expand and get bigger and more things happen, they're constantly like, how can we make this process more efficient and as minimal of a headache as possible for all parties involved? Because Star Wars has this idea that everything is canon, right? Everything is canon except the little golden books that have like, Leia and Darth Vader like going on that. Well, now except for that comic book, because it was canon, but then Dave Filoni, did his own version of that thing. So that's like, certain point of view, right? Well, and right.
Yeah.
And we keep running
and
into
so
that.
on and so
and
on.
so on and so on and so on, because it's just impossible. And when I was at Marvel, the executive editor over there is a wonderful man named Tom Brevoort. He has a saying that I truly take to heart, and Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans hate it when I say it, but everything is canon until it isn't. Because it's that's how you maintain having storytelling go on for as long as possible. And these are fictional stories that take place in a fictional universe, and we are all human. Having that been said, Story Group does have a wonderful working relationship with all of its partners. It used to be everyone in Story Group had to read everything that came through from every single partner, which was impossible. And then they kind of branched out where like this member of Story Group oversees all of books, this member oversees all comics, this member oversees all of games, and so on and so forth. And they would meet and talk about all the stuff that's happening, and then go back to their like, you know, their different licensees. And I think it still works in some sort of similar fashion. But I mean, it's anyone outside looking in, it's pretty, I think it's pretty transparent. Films are the most canon, then the TV shows, then the games, then the, you know, books, comics, you know, like blah, 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 all the way down. And, you know, yeah, people are human, you know, like that's the thing. All of this stuff is getting made at the same time constantly, and it's chaos down here, Tom.
Well, it allows,
Sorry,
it creates arguments, and which keeps the conversation going, which honestly, it's not until the arguments get ugly and weird. It's good to have these conversations. It's good for the fandom to keep doing that.
Well, and I was even going to throw in there, just on the same but opposite side of that coin, we also have to remember sometimes that these are all different forms of art, and art is nothing if not subjective, and the ability not only to have an argument, but also to have an interpretation and to be able to look at it and go, you know, okay, I read a comic different than I watch a TV show, different than I watch a movie.
Right. And I, you know, as I often like to say, and this is an argument I would get in with Story Group all the time. Looking at you, Matt and Pablo. No, you know, a lot of times when working with various IP, and this isn't just Star Wars, but they'll have this rule of, you can't have hyperbolics. You can't have first, last, most, greatest, least, right? You can't have a character say, well, this is the fastest ship in the galaxy. You can't say that, because if you say that, well, then that's canon, right? And now we have to be beholden to that. A character can't say, well, this is my first time I've ever had a taste of blue milk, because then that's canon. And you know, for me, I'm just like, how many times has Han Solo said something that was like totally hyperbolic and not true?
Yes.
Right? How many times has any human being said something that's like a stretch of the truth, right? And so I'm kind of that same mind where, you know, if we're reading these through the perspective of these characters, this is their canon. This is their canon. This is their truth. And that's how I personally sell the whole Dave Filoni changing the whole Order 66 with Kanan, that whole thing. I'm like, look, our memories evolve and change as we get older. We process our traumas, and you know, we live with the way that we can cope with it.
Without a doubt, Han Solo's Twitter bio says prone to hyperbole right in the bio.
Exactly. Well, we speaking of hyperbole, we do have the best audience of all the Star Wars shows out there, and we do have a couple questions. Let's just pick one question to throw to Heather from our group there. We have Ramsey Hassan says, big fan of your art posts on Instagram. How has your creative endeavors influenced your editing and vice versa?
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much. They keep me sane. No, it's funny. It's still a bit of a secret to a lot of the people I work with that I draw, which I find hilarious. But I've been drawing my entire life. I've been writing my entire life. I just during the pandemic, I think with us all not being able to, you know, go out and socialize, I started posting more and like really tracking my progress through digital art on social media. And if anything, I think it's helped me garner a better relationship with the talent that I work with, just because they see that like, oh, I actually know their process and understand what they're going through, and I can speak their language. Selfishly, it also helps me do my own art edits, so I don't have to wait for someone on production or wait for one of my artists to turn around art edits. I can do them myself. So if you have picked up some Star Wars comics, you have actually seen some of my art corrections in there. I've fixed many a droid. But and it's just, for me, it's a nice wind down at the end of the day to use a different part of my brain, because when I am problem solving and critiquing story and reading scripts, it's a lot of critical thinking and processing information constantly. And so to wind down at the end of every night, just with like, you know, Parks and Rec on in the background and, you know, just drawing, I don't have to think. And it's very therapeutic.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. I love that. You have a couple of projects on the horizon. You were just tweeting about a couple things. Tell us specifically about she's running on Fumes. I'm curious about that.
Yes.
And then also tell us where people will be able to find you, because I know you're doing some touring of different shows too. But let's start with this it's a Comixology exclusive, right?
Yeah, it's a Comixology exclusive. So she's running on Fumes is a partially autobiographical comic by Dennis Hopeless. Dennis Hopeless wrote Spider-Woman for Marvel. He's written Exo Manowar at Valiant. He's written a bunch of stuff. Sea Stars Image. But he this is a comic that is all about his mom learning how to chop cars when he was a kid to get out of an abusive relationship. And it is one of the most heart-wrenching, beautiful stories I've ever had a chance to work on. I was so honored when he asked me to be a part of such an intimate story of his life. It's hilarious. It's very heartwarming. And you know, the most insane parts of that story are true. So if you read the comic and you say, this absolutely didn't happen, I guarantee you that's one of the moments that was real. Tyler Jenkins, Hillary Jenkins' art on it is stunning. They're beautifully watercolored pages, all done by hand. And yeah, it's on Comixology right now. So you can literally buy it and read it right now. You can jump off the stream and go read this comic.
Go do it. While you're watching the stream, go download it. And then when the stream is done, go read it.
Yeah. And then this year I'm traveling everywhere. I just got back from New Orleans. Literally next week I'm going to be in Vancouver for Fan Expo Vancouver. Next month I'm going to be in Toronto. And then after that I think I'm in Cleveland. But I'm touring all over the country this year to various Comic-Cons. So if you see me talk about one coming near you, please come say hello. Have a bunch of comics, have a bunch of art.
That's fantastic.
That's outstanding. And I'm going to throw one more question from the chat because I can. This is from Brian. Brian said, Heather, are you going to start selling your Eras Tour artwork as prints? And as someone who just yesterday joined your Taylor Swift Discord as a Gen X Swiftie, I have to say, y'all, if you're into Taylor Swift and you like comics and art, Heather's your one-stop shop for all of that.
Yes, I do have them as prints. I am selling them in person at the conventions that I'm at. But if you are interested in them, I don't have my web store up yet. Hoping to get that around to that sometime this year. But DM me and we can work something out. So
well, Heather, it is always a pleasure to get to hang out with you. It's always so much fun. We're such big fans of everything that you do. Thank you for always being with us, hanging out with us. And on behalf of everybody that watches the show, everybody that gets to interact with you on Twitter, you're so fun. You're so great to interact with people who aren't being jerks. So the jerks can go pound sand. Everybody else is always excited to get to hang out with you. So thanks for being here, and we can't wait to see you again soon.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
Always.